We sometimes get questions from gardeners concerning what they should do with their perennial plantings during the winter. The big question is whether to cut them back or leave the tops on. Well, it used to be an accepted practice to come out to the garden after we'd had a few freezes and the tops of our perennials had been killed, and all the leaves had fallen from the trees, and just clean everything up, rake up all the leaves, cut all the perennials back to the ground, and just leave everything sort of bare or exposed. This was something that I used to do when I worked for a landscape maintenance company over in Tulsa. The idea was that by getting the garden all cleaned up this time of the year, we could get a jump or a head start on the spring cleanup for next year. Well, it's true that you do get rid of a lot of that material this time of the year and you don't have to clean it up later on, but there are also some really good benefits for leaving the tops on your plants and not cutting them back. Some gardeners just like the interest that some of the seed heads of our perennials provide during the winter. The ornamental grasses are specifically noted for their unique winter interest. And even though the seed heads and the tops of the plants are brown, they still give us something to look at through the months of winter. By not cutting the perennials back and leaving all the tops on, you will be providing resources for wildlife. There are some butterflies that lay their eggs within the leaves of perennials so they can overwinter, and that way there are lots of birds that will eat the seeds of some of the seed heads of the perennials that we leave behind. Plants like echinacea, rudbeckia, or heliopsis, or coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and false sunflowers. The plants or the perennial tops also provide a little bit of shelter or resting grounds or cover for some birds and other wildlife. Even if they've fallen over in the garden, they will still give some wildlife that little bit of shelter. Probably the best reason, or the number one argument for not cutting your perennials back in the winter, is that it will increase the survivability of certain perennials. Sometimes here in Oklahoma we have wild, wacky winter weather, perhaps some severe swings in temperature, or if we have an unusually wet winter, which can sometimes kill hardy perennials that otherwise would survive. Just the tops of the plants themselves will provide a little bit of insulation or a little bit of barrier for the roots and crowns. And also, if you leave those stems intact, they will collect leaves and other debris that kind of blows around the garden. It'll collect there and also help insulate those roots and crowns. About 10 years ago, there was a study done with perennial mums which showed that those that were left intact through the winter resprouted quicker and better and turned out to be stronger plants than those that were cut back. So just that little bit of extra insulation may mean the difference on the survivability of some of our plants, especially some of those that maybe aren't quite as winter hardy, like our Pois Castle Artemisia or things like the autumn sages, the Salvia greggii. Well, there are some exceptions and some reasons why we might want to cut back some of our perennials. If you have a really heavy insect infestation or perhaps a disease problem on some of your perennials, like perhaps some powdery mildew on Monarda or bee balm, in these cases it would be wise to cut all that material off, bag it up, tie it up, and discard it. And don't even compost those problem parts of the plants. Also, some perennials tend to reseed prolifically in the garden, and it would be a good idea to cut back some of those plants, get rid of those seed heads. A couple of examples of perennials that we cut the seed heads off of each year are the inland oat grass and also the garlic chives, just so we don't get lots of offspring coming up next year. Well, when it comes to the leaves on your perennial beds, if you have a few leaves, that'll be great. That'll provide that extra insulation. But if you get just a really heavy leaf drop or a really heavy concentration of leaves on your perennials, you would want to rake up some of those. We don't want to keep our beds too wet or too moist through the winter because that can mean the death of some of our perennials. Well, once again, we're going to leave the tops on our perennials. That'll give us a little bit of insulation. We'll provide some resources for wildlife. And then next year, about the middle of March, we'll come out here, we'll cut everything back and get our garden cleaned up for the springtime.